Now, we all know that next week could be one of the biggest weeks in history for the crypto industry in the United States, the election setting the tone for what's likely to come. But there was also a lot that happened this week. Luckily, we have NLW here to unpack it all for the Friday Five. Let's go.
Let's go.
What is up, everybody? I'm Scott Melker, also known as the Wolf of All Streets. Before we get started, please subscribe to the channel. Hit that like button. Another week where it seems like 1,000 things happened. We're no longer in the boring stages of the cycle. Good morning, man. How are you?
Great. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm McLaren. You are Mercedes again. We didn't plan it, but it's happening. So listen, we got to give an honorable mention really quick just because it happened this morning. We obviously got non-farm payroll job numbers, and I had to check 4 times to see if this was correct. The U.S. economy adds 12,000 jobs in October. The expectation was 106,000. This is the lowest print since July 2021. Now, unemployment was in line, but these are exceptionally low job numbers. And surprise, guys, I know you're not going to believe this, but they revised the last 2 strong months down 81,000 in August from 159 to 78, and September, that huge print we had, down 31 to 250, from 254 to 223, and just days before the election here. You can't believe these numbers anymore, man.
We haven't been able to for forever. I mean, it's like, when haven't we like had a revision downward at this point, you know? I mean, it's interesting. It'll be fascinating to see if this really moves the needle at all, or if it's sort of just so incidental relative to kind of, pre-election, just hold on and see what happens next. That's kind of my base case of how it plays out in practice.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. And I think this just gives the Fed the cover they need for another cut.
Yeah, I mean, honestly,
that's to me, the story is like, maybe they weren't going to cut again, and now they're going to cut again.
To be honest, it does feel like the type of thing where, so we're seeing an immediate market reaction down, but it kind of feels like pretty inevitably when the market sort of like takes a step back, I think that they're going to come to that exact same conclusion that you are, that, any question of whether there was going to be sort of like a pause might be out for this cycle, so I don't know. I mean, I guess that the, part of what the market had been trying to figure out is if rate cuts were, sort of bullish because things were normalizing, or bearish because things were going bad. And so this is sort of, in the bad column. But I tend to think that, there's sort of an initial reaction where the market is trying to figure that out, and then they remember they're getting a rate cut either way, and then they get happy again. So, it should be fine.
I think futures dumped and then pumped kind of immediately, the usual like knee-jerk reactions in both directions. So I think our first story here is kind of Bitcoin price action, obviously, because I think, technical analysts have been watching that 69.70 level. Let's finally get back above that. Well, we did. And we've been relatively good at staying there for the moment. We've got Bitcoin price takes breather as Bitcoin ETFs record another day of monster inflows. We've got BlackRock Bitcoin ETF getting record inflow ahead of U.S. election. And then, of course, Bitcoin price drop leads to 250 million bullish liquidations. Crypto sentiment indicator singles top. That's the extreme greed that we've been having. And then we need narratives for why we barely made it back to 70,000. Bitcoin's run toward record high falters as Trump election odds dip. So much going on here. All I see is Bitcoin went up really far, really fast, and then all the leverage got flushed, and here we are right back at an amazing level of 70,000.
Yeah, I think that the bummer for me, which is, a very silly bummer to have, but this is sort of like the closest we've ever had to being able to make a new all-time high on Bitcoin white paper day. And we just couldn't get it done. I mean, I feel like some whale should have taken one for the team, just sort of mass smash the bid button and gotten it done. But, we are now officially ahead of, or the longest period of time at which, Bitcoin has been above 70,000, which is, it's kind of the type of moment where you so anticipate, wanting to get above that, that it's that consolation prize of this sort of being in totally uncharted territory kind of goes out the window. It is weird though. I mean, plenty of people have commented on the divergence between the price and the sort of sentiment.
Yeah, I agree. And you sort of mentioned Bitcoin Satoshi white paper day. I mean, we've got a tweet from Donald Trump. I would like to wish our great Bitcoiners a happy 16th anniversary of Satoshi's white paper. We will end Kamala's war on crypto, and Bitcoin will be made in the USA. Vote Trump. And then, of course, Hunter Horsley from Bitwise. Would you have imagined this from U.S. presidential candidate a year ago? We're entering the mainstream era. I mean, I think that's just incredible that something like that could be tweeted from a presidential candidate. It's
we would have imagined it from Donald Trump 4 years ago, because he was screaming about how he was no fan of Bitcoin. Although, you know, if we're being honest, he was never screaming about that. He was letting Steve
Mnuchin was tweeting.
Yeah.
Mnuchin stole his phone in the morning and fired off some tweets about his hatred for Bitcoin. But still, this really does show you how much things have changed in the past years, when we had such bearish sentiment and such fears about the United States government to some degree on both sides. And here we are right where the cycle should be, back in the 70,000s, waiting to break an all-time high with the election. I mean, you know, the title here's why next week will be pivotal for crypto. Well, that shows you, right? I mean, it's going to matter who's the president for the next 4 years.
Yeah, I mean, it absolutely will. And, you know, I think that, you know, there's sort of an interesting nuance to the political conversation where it matters both, I think, as much as people feel, but also sort of not as much, in the sense that it will be highly consequential. We've seen with this administration how much sort of, you know, a White House's disposition towards the asset, whether it's direct or whether it's by verge of allowing someone else to control their disposition towards it, can impact policy. At the same time, I think that post-election, we will sort of, you know, remember that it's going to be fine in either case. It's just how fine it is and how much we have to deal with on the, you know, along the way.
I agree with that. Well, there's one person that we're definitely not surprised is very bullish on Bitcoin right now, but maybe we can finally be surprised at just how bullish he is. Michael Saylor. MicroStrategy's 21 billion equity plan tops Tesla for record. So that is absolutely nuts. And then when you consider that 21 is actually 42, and we have a story here. MicroStrategy Saylor pitches volatile share price a sign of healthy capital. But this guy has always been all in. We've still been surprised at just how all in he is every single time he raises a little more debt to buy a little more Bitcoin. $42 billion more in 3 years. Can he pull this off?
I am not in the business of betting against Saylor when it comes to his appetite for acquisition. You know, look, at some point, the eyes get so large that even the free marketers go like, do we really want him buying all that much? But for now, you know, I think that if you're really looking at it, you're looking at price support for as far as the eye can see at this stage. So, you know, it's super ambitious. I think, you know, he is abundantly clear about it. What was really interesting about this earnings call where they were discussing the strategy is Saylor threw down the gauntlet. It was very clear that it was no longer a sort of justifying how they think about things. It was about basically a sort of denial that anyone could catch up to them without going all in, right? He basically said at one point during the call, like, you know, other people are going to get interested in this. There's no way they can actually copy us without going all in. And no one can go as all in as we can go right now because of, you know, we didn't start here. We had to sort of grow this. And it was very interesting just how different the sort of the conversation was. In fact, more broadly, one of the things that I noticed doing shows this week is I had a full ass show about earnings calls related to crypto. There was Robinhood, Coinbase, MicroStrategy, you know, and a couple of others. And, you know, obviously we kind of know all these things in the abstract, but the fact that there was a full, you know, kind of full show's worth of news about earnings calls from the public markets that relate specifically to crypto is sort of just a reminder of just how different things are.
Well, Robinhood did poorly, as you mentioned them. And I think it's interesting to talk about Coinbase very briefly here, but their shares tumbled the most since 2022 after results lagged estimates. They had total revenue of 1.21 billion. Of course, that's very good, but it's how you do versus expectations, and expectations were 1.25, and their net income was 75 million, which was below the 112.2 million expected. But important to note, I think, that during this period last year, they lost $2 million. Right. So Coinbase is healthy, doing exceptionally well. But looking at these two, which pre-ETF were sort of the biggest proxies for the crypto market or Bitcoin in general, MicroStrategy is wildly outperforming Coinbase now and the others.
Yeah. I mean, so the thing that's different is that MicroStrategy, all you have to be, your calculus is entirely around what you think Bitcoin's going to do to some extent, right? Plus what MicroStrategy is signaling. I think the other thing that's interesting about MicroStrategy telegraphing this strategy in a way that they perhaps haven't before in terms of getting specific is that it gives analysts a chance to kind of actually start to put models around how they think MicroStrategy is going to behave relative to the price of Bitcoin, right? It gives it a chance to kind of catch up to its sort of, the premium of MicroStrategy stock versus the underlying Bitcoin. Whereas with Coinbase, Coinbase has always been a tale of two revenue streams. One is trading and the other is everything else. And so, Coinbase's trading revenue was down over the last quarter because it was just quiet, right? We all felt it. We had to make up a bunch of stuff. Like, luckily, Trump and Kamala were here for us, making sure that we had something to talk about every week this summer. But it was quiet, right? It is, even this year, I think, has disproportionately quiet, even relative to price. And so, the Coinbase has for years now been really clear that everything in that company, the long term, is about diversifying those revenue streams. Like, that's what they focus on. It's base, it's custody, it's all of these things. And they're showing, if you kind of take a step out from quarterly results, they're absolutely showing progress on those things. But trading is still king. It's still driving a big portion of the revenue. So I think that your assessment is right, that this was still an extremely sort of healthy performance, just didn't quite get at expectations. But I think expectations were, I don't know, one of the things that it's interesting about expectations is I think crypto companies we're still in a period where Wall Street analysts aren't that good at understanding what's going on in markets. And so it makes it hard for them to kind of get expectations right when it comes to trading, because they're not sort of familiar with those dynamics. And my guess is that will get better over time.
Yeah, they throw a dart to get an expectation, then the stock moves based on how the actual numbers come in relative to those expectations. Wall Street doesn't understand how to value base, right? They don't understand that if we get a raging altcoin bull market in the next 3 months, that Coinbase's revenues are going to absolutely skyrocket. But hey, I see that as an opportunity more than
totally
indictment, certainly for Coinbase. And listen, so we had a Bitcoin move, obviously, to the upside, and I can tell you exactly why it happened. It's because we had Tether FUD. And if you get Tether FUD, it's always some sort of bottom or precedes some sort of major Bitcoin move to the upside. We have this story here: the crypto's too big to fail. Token Tether faces new threat from U.S. and Tether usage shifting largely out of the United States as U.S. scrutiny of 120 billion stablecoin grows. First of all, this thing is 120 billion. I don't know where it was this time last year, but it wasn't close to that.
Yeah.
Tether, absolutely one of the most profitable, incredibly growing, fast companies in the world. And seemingly, even this FUD is dated and kind of nonsensical. And the DOJ is sort of always looking at Tether, right? And, it just seems like there was nothing new here.
Yeah. I mean, listen, so one, I think that you're right. Like, at this size and at every size that it hits from now on, the scrutiny, there will always be scrutiny on Tether. It is simply too big to not be constantly scrutinized, right? Every office and every potential, regulator and enforcement division is going to be constantly looking at this company. It's just massive, and it's so getting to be, more and more systemically important. So that's sort of inevitable. What's interesting about this story is sort of the question of, there's a few different scenarios that this could be. One is there is a pipeline between the DOJ and sort of major news outlets that we've seen before that use press leaks effectively as tactics to try to kind of exert pressure. I think the place that we saw this most, and this kind of resembled to me, was in the months leading up to Binance's settlement. We saw a lot of these types of leaks from privileged sources in the enforcement divisions, well-sourced, that, sort of felt like they existed to put pressure on the company in question to maybe come to the settlement table. Now, we've got tons of those with Binance. I mean, there was a series of like 4 or 5 of them that happened. So, this is not that same pattern. It's just a single story, but it is reminiscent of that to me. At the same time, this story could be a single person inside the DOJ who has an axe to grind, who wants to throw, a tomahawk on their way out the office. Like there's a lot of reasons to also not take it all that seriously. I think that the tinfoil hat, not that tinfoily, not that hatty kind of look at this is Howard Lutnick has been getting larger and larger in the media, as Trump's transition team co-chair. And, he's a huge Tether bull because his company is custodying it. And, maybe there's some lawfare, or the sort of pre-lawfare politicking going on. Who knows? I think ultimately we should assume that with where Tether sits, and I have to assume that Tether knows this, and they've given all the indications that they are operating as such. They are now officially sort of too big to operate kind of fully outside the system. They're clearly still focused on providing services for, outside the US and the global South, but they've also spent the last 3 years not ceding the official US stablecoin story to USDC. There could have been a moment where in 2021, 2022, Tether kind of just said, like, you know what, Circle, you get the US, we'll take everything else. But they haven't. They talk all the time about how much they work with the FBI and all, so I would assume that whatever amount of scrutiny there is, Tether is taking it head on and using their considerable war chest to make sure that they are out ahead of it.
Yeah, and this is one of the guys they fear, Gary Gensler. Interesting here that he's gone mainstream, right? I love the beginning of this article, and you can unpack it a bit for us. It is my personal belief that no normal person should know the name of the Securities and Exchange Commission's chair, and yet here I am about to explain why he's been an issue in the 2024 presidential election. Good job, Gary. What do you think?
Yeah. This is an interesting article in the sense that journalist, not a pro-crypto bull, not necessarily even she, kind of provided some amount of logic, not like sort of that you're supposed to believe, but at least an explanation for why the SEC would use its sort of regulation by enforcement strategy. Basically, the argument of the piece is that regulation by enforcement is what's available to them because judges keep letting them do it. So that's, they're incentivized to kind of take that path. She kind of lays the blame at the feet of Congress for not giving the SEC more resources. But at the same time, it's pretty clear that there's not a lot of compassion for the idea that the SEC says come in and register and then doesn't allow people to come in and work with them. So I think if you were a totally objective outsider just reading this, probably what you'd come away with is thinking, boy, all that looks messy. There's clearly not a hero on the Gensler side. Maybe I understand where they're coming from, but I don't think it's a particularly positive look for Gensler or this SEC in their approach.
This guy's got to go no matter what happens. And the reason that he's got to go for this administration is that we have a few surveys here that are saying that crypto really matters. This is from Paradigm. Crypto will matter at the ballot box this November, which of course is now. And then we had one from the Digital Chamber. I spoke with Perry and Boring actually yesterday about this. Another major polling piece that basically said that 16% of voters care deeply about crypto and would consider voting for a candidate based almost solely on their belief about crypto. It actually went into a lot of other interesting findings, especially that the people who were voting Democrat and believed in crypto largely thought that the Democrats were more pro-crypto, and those voting Republican thought that the Republicans were more pro-crypto. So it's important sometimes to step out of our echo chamber and realize that things are very bipartisan, and most people are just going to assume that their team is better for their thing.
Yeah. I mean, there's something nice about that, honestly. People have this sort of faith and confidence, but I don't know, man, it's still hard for me to wrap my head around these statistics. I think a lot of them are, what is clear from the aggregate of all of these polls is that this is a meaningful issue to a meaningful portion of people. Where they tend to lose me is when they kind of try to construct questions that that are about single issue-ness. It's very hard for me to believe that actually 5% of Americans are single issue crypto voters. I don't think there's very few issues that have 5% of Americans as single issue voters around that thing. But it almost doesn't matter, because that's so incidental to the fact that there is no way to read these polls and what has happened in this election cycle and not see crypto having emerged fully as a meaningful political force, an issue that, speaks specifically to a lot of people, as well as being resonant with a lot of other related issues. Crypto is here on the ballot box, on the agenda, whether people are voting exclusively on their crypto beliefs or just as a part of a thing. It's not ignorable in any meaningful way. And, more than any polling, the candidate posture has demonstrated that.
Yeah, so that wraps the major stories we were going to talk about. It was such a big week that we had a lot of honorable mentions. We had a new fake Satoshi, which was supposed to be announced in a press release in London. We had, obviously, the Treasurer was advising on tokenization, basically said that stable coins help the US dollar, which was interesting, but then completely left crypto out of their financial inclusion report. We had Emory University buying Bitcoin ETFs, Hong Kong prepared for crypto markets, Kraken restructuring and firing people, Consensus laying off people, DYDX. When I tell you guys it was another big week, there was a lot there.
Yeah. I mean, listen, it's I think that this is our last Friday 5 before the election. Next week, we're going to be able to actually kind of like sift through, well, presuming that we know who the new president is at that time, which is anyone's bet. We're going to have a lot to sift through, but I think where we kind of just ended is a pretty good reflection of what the last 3 to 6 months have taught us in terms of the crypto story. Here we are in an election cycle where crypto has absolutely and undeniably become a major issue, where we had a candidate from one of the major parties, lauding Bitcoiners in the Satoshi white paper, Bitcoin white paper day yesterday on Halloween, where, the crypto political forces have meaningfully swayed, primary elections up and down the ballot. And where Bitcoin is sitting at, above 70,000 for the longest period that it has, as it's seeing record inflows for an ETF that's largely driven by institutional buyers. Like, if you need a picture of where things are right now and how different it is, it's a pretty good snapshot.
Absolutely agree. I'm not sure if I'm looking forward to or dreading next Friday, but I guess we'll see how the next 7 days of our lives go. It's important to remember, guys, that if the person that you support loses, the world's going to be over next Friday. So half of it, I don't know if we'll all even be here.
Yeah, we'll see about how, well, it's crypto, so we'll see about, like, I don't know, like somewhere between 30 and 70% of you, I guess.
Yeah, that's exactly right. All right, guys, that's all we got. Nathaniel unpacked a lot of this on the breakdown, obviously, this week. So if you want more in depth, go back and listen to those and listen to them into the future to get a preview of what you might hear on the next Friday 5. Go ahead, give him a follow, and always listen, man. Thank you so much. See you next week.
There, guys.
Let's go.